Let me introduce myself because not everyone knows me. I do have some familiar faces in the call, but I also have some new people. So my name is Karin Holley. I'm based in the Netherlands, in The Hague. I'm delighted to have you all here, and Mary Lyn, my guest speaker as well. I am a certified leadership and mindset coach, and I support entrepreneurs, professionals, leaders who really want to find more balance, more joy, more confidence, because they're feeling quite overwhelmed by everything that they need to do. And they're high achieving and they're really ambitious, but it's just all getting a bit too much. The whole goal is for them to really be more of their authentic selves and live more fulfilled lives and careers. Hence the name of this conversation series, which I've named Authentic Pathways, where we are going to be listening to inspiring stories of leading a life true to oneself and lessons learned along the way. And this is a podcast series for professionals who value professional and personal growth, who want to lead and live with love, who want to make a difference and connect with others and trust and believe in themselves. The reason why I think authenticity and fulfillment is so important is because these are actually some values that high achievers struggle with. I mean, I'm one myself. Like, we get so goal-oriented, we forget to enjoy the journey towards those achievements. And it can also come at a cost to our health and our relationships. I know many successful people out there that are actually quite unfulfilled and not having the impact that they want to have and not having the relationships that they want to have. So when I thought of who I wanted to have as a first speaker for this series, immediately Mary Lyn popped into my head, because she will be talking to us about becoming the director of your life. We will do this for about 30 to 40 minutes or so. Then we'll open up the conversation to have you join us with questions and comments. I've closed the chat for now so that we stay focused and don't get distracted. If you have a burning question, please write it down so you don't forget it. The reason why I thought of Mary Lyn to join me here today is because I met her about 2 years ago through another dear friend of mine, Bridget. And together, both of them were facilitating a workshop for leaders. And she got to do the icebreaker. And it was about moments of kindness. And I was like, oh, it's just this calmness and the love that emanated from her and towards all of us really was something very special. So hence, I wanted to share Mary Lyn with the rest of the world. But now, a little bit about who is Mary Lyn, besides that she's an incredibly kind person. She was born in Scotland. She lives now in Zurich. She has over 30 years experience at the secondary and primary levels of education in various parts of the world. She was head of school at the Intercommunity School of Zurich for 10 years and principal head of school at the British School in Montevideo, Uruguay for about 10 years. And before that, she was associate academic dean of the School of Business at the Universidad de Montevideo in Uruguay. And she holds a master's degree from Duke University, a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University, is Special Teachers Are Recognized Award recipient from Cornell University in New York. And she was also a participant of the first Future of Learning workshop at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She is an experienced Council of International Schools and New England Association of Schools and Colleges accreditation team leader. She's led various teams in Central America, Europe, and the United States. And she's also running a project on wellness and happiness certification for international schools. She's been interviewed on TV, and her written work has been quoted in global publications. So basically, folks, we have a superstar with us. Can you tell us a bit more just about yourself?
Yeah, well, first of all, I squirm with embarrassment when people read out what presumably is important. Because when we were talking about this, Karin, I did say, I think all of my background is irrelevant to the conversation that we're actually having today. You know, what leads or what allows you to have a fulfilling life is certainly not just the career pathway or potentially the external recognition that you may or may not have had. Thank you for the generous introduction, But I would hope that we could just erase that from our memories as we continue through in the conversation, because it's a brilliant question, this one, of what allows us to lead a fulfilling life. I suspect that for each one of us, we're in a different stage of our life. And so therefore, the way in which we're answering that might be slightly different. For me, after this entering into this new chapter, as I leave certain arenas of work and of personal fulfillment and I move into others, I find that there's a constancy that's been with me in my life, that to lead a fulfilling life, whether I was 12 or as I am now into my 60s, it's the questions of, are there really good questions that we're asking ourselves? Are we filled with curiosity? So whether it was that 12-year-old child or whether it's this 60-year-old woman, what are the questions we're grappling with? And that leads to a fulfilling life. But there's three things. It's the questions. It's, are we living with wonder and awe? No. Are we inspired by what we see and what we interact with and who we meet? And finally, are we living in unconditional love? And I know that unconditional love has been tainted a little bit in society today, and that sometimes we refer to it as a romantic love or something that is the exclusive domain of a particular relationship. But I'm actually advocating for the kind of love that you can extend to anyone, even a stranger. And so part of my work today, moving forward, is also to work on love-based leadership. And what does that look like in the corporate world and also in the educational world? But coming back to the question of a fulfilling life, and that's why I think all of us can answer it and answer it in different ways. For me personally, it was keeping close really, really good questions, questions of deep inquiry, questions that inspired me, that led me to ask other questions, that led me to interact with other people, that led me to do things that were outside of my comfort zone. And then maintaining that sense of wonder. Oh, I wonder if, and I wonder when, and I wonder how. And I am actually just amazed by the world that we live in. And so even out on a walk, I'm privileged enough to live in Switzerland. Everything just strikes me as an opportunity to look at something differently. And when I'm accompanied by someone else, like on the weekend, I was accompanied by an architect friend of mine. They were reminding me to look at buildings in different ways, no? And you could be accompanied by somebody who's a healer or who works with energy fields, and then they'll walk with you and see something different, no? And so not only are they inspiring you, but they're creating that sense of wonder. And then to me, the most important part, and it's guided me throughout my entire life, is, do we feel a sense of love towards the world, towards, and I know it's a really challenging question to ask nowadays with the level of conflict and the dynamics that we're exposed to at multiple levels in society. But can we take that sense of unconditionally loving our world, our society, our community, our close friends and family, ourself as well? And so that has helped me find answers to what fulfills me in my life. But Karin, I know that we talked about this is like a Russian doll, no? You uncover layers as you move forward. You have a layer that you think you're working with, and then you have another layer that you think you're working with, and you keep on moving forward to presumably get to the core of who you are. If you can work on yourself, you do tend to also feel more confident moving forward with a sense of fulfillment.
Beautiful. Thank you for introducing us to these three principles that you have, Mary Lyn, of curiosity, asking questions. As a coach, of course, I really value that as well. And then the idea of awe and wonder, and I'm going to add the word maybe magic even to the world around us, and look for sources of inspiration. And then the third one, that unconditional love. And
Right.
I'm curious, Mary Lyn, if there was any questions that were significant for you that you maybe still remember, or maybe in your last kind of pivot, that really felt that you had to go deeper. What question made you uncover another piece of that Russian doll and go more to your core?
Well, I think many times we define ourselves too narrowly. We tend to define ourselves by what we do And by what we do, I mean professionally in the marketplace, what we do to contribute to society from that perspective. I was looking at a clip with Noah Trevor the other day, and he was saying, if he was speaking to a Frenchman, the Frenchman would answer that question with saying, what I do is I go out, I talk to my friends. What do you do for a living? Well, I breathe. And it's so different from what we answer. We answer with it, we're an architect, we're a teacher, we're a leadership, in a leadership position, etc. And that's such a narrow definition of who we are. So I do think, and I do want to encourage people that in this last pivot that I've made, I came out of a very predefined role, which was a head of school. And it had a very predefined set of communities that it interacted and a predefined definition of what supposedly good heads did in good schools. And I'd had a leadership position for 20 years in different educational settings. And this was the last period for another 10 years. And I was just asking myself, am I really doing what fulfills me, what connects to my essence? No? And in what sense does this setting, this environment limit me from being who I need to be? And that's where I went through a lot of coaching. I explored some deeper questions. I looked at past patterns in my life. I looked at my level of emotional maturity, my level of resilience and comfort with dynamic change. I went to different professionals and I asked them questions. I said, well, if I'm working on this domain of myself, how can I move forward? And as a coach, a good coach is fabulous. I mean, they give you that reflected reality back to you as to where are the areas that you can extend yourself. What could you do in a different way? And in that process, I reconfigured myself to become a social impact entrepreneur. And in fact, many of the things I do now are very similar to the things I did as a head, which was I was in a school with a social mission and with social projects that had important impacts on different dimensions. And I, as a head of school, was responsible for resourcing and financing the capacity of the school to carry through this particular mission or project. And transferring that into another sector of society has allowed me to pick on certain projects, like the one you mentioned. I'm working on happiness issues and working with the Happiness Summit. This is the group that was founded by Karen Guggenheim and that runs a summit once a year where the happiness reports about world happiness are published, and they work in close liaison with the Oxford Centre for Research on Wellbeing. They also work with the Worldwide Wellbeing Movement. And they've just recently created a liaison with the London School of Economics for working on policies that support happiness and well-being in communities or in societies, and what's the impact on society if we don't do that. So funnily enough, here I was in a particular world, the educational one, and got myself into this other conversation. And as a result of competencies that I had, and also just believing that I didn't need to narrowly define myself. I didn't need to define myself only by what I had done, but I could also choose to define myself by something that I could potentially do. And I think that's really important when you're exploring transitions, having the confidence to say, I am not just what I've done. I am the director of my destiny. I don't need to be a victim of circumstances. I can be the warrior that moves forward with possibilities of redefining myself and reinventing myself. So as a result, at the end of January, I'll be at the World Economic Forum. I'll be talking in a panel about the importance of happiness to the fabric of society and how happiness and well-being supports us in creating circles of trust, and why is trust important to flourishing, not only economically, but also within broad levels in society itself. So yeah, it's been a really interesting journey. But again, I would start with, don't define yourself too narrowly. Allow yourself to think about what is a desired outcome. Bridget and I just finished a workshop with you, Karin, that we were talking about active hope. Well, sometimes we think things are predetermined and we just hope that they turn out more successfully. But active hope is actually an invitation for us to look at a desired outcome and work towards it, even if we might believe it's hard to achieve. But it just shifts the perspective slightly so that we begin to do something that doesn't let us fall into victimhood, like, okay, this is happening in the world and I just have to hope things are going to get better. No, it allows us to become directors of our destiny, because what we're engaging in is painting a picture of something that we would like to move towards, and actually taking baby steps or larger steps towards moving in that direction. For those of you who are into New Age and energy fields, etc., you can talk about manifestations, and actually, what I really love is going along the continuum of what's happening in our conversations across the world today. We have some very mind-centered conversations, and we have people who are working in transformational ideas, and therefore they're talking about our interconnectedness with the environment and with the world and with each other and our energy fields. And you can stop at any one point in that continuum and just say, what do I have to learn from this experience? What does it bring me that I haven't traditionally experienced? So that's a little bit where I am right now. But I think you also asked what may have influenced me in my life to arrive at this way of thinking. And you pushed me also, and I'm talking more personally about my life. When I was an adolescent, my father was with a multinational, and we were working in a country where there was a degree of conflict. He received a death threat, from a particular group of activists. And I remember him taking me aside and saying, I know this may scare you, and it is scary, and I recognize that, but I want to ask you, what do you think is our responsibility in pushing someone else into thinking that the only option they had was to take our lives? No? And for me, that was an epiphany. That was a moment that marked my life. I've always tried to ask myself, what is it when we are in positions of privilege or leadership or even in comfort that we also have to consider that might be having an impact on somebody else? And so how do we care for others as an integral part of caring for ourselves? That has stayed with me during my tenure, certainly in education. I was always focused on what one of my mentors said. I said, Mary Lyn, in education, it's as simple as, are we learning and are we caring? Are we creating the conditions for good learning and are we creating the conditions for good caring? One without the other doesn't work. And so in my tenure in Uruguay and in my tenure in Switzerland, it was deinstitutionalizing schools, making them home for students, hopefully making them home also for staff members, and working on the soft aspects of the culture so that we could heighten our emotional intelligence. I had the privilege of having Ochin Powell and Bill Powell come in several times. They also worked on cognitive coaching, helping us how to talk to other people. They worked on adaptive schools, understanding how we live in a complex environment and therefore we have to be continuously adapting to that reality. And then the journey was about senior leadership, and now the journey continues for certain schools on middle level leadership development. And as you can tell, it's not about us individually, it's about us collectively. And we co-construct our environments to meet our purpose. And in schools, that purpose is to support learning and to support an environment where children really feel that they are cared for. I would go a step further nowadays to say society needs to feel as if it's heard, valued, recognized, supported. And if I'm lucky and pushing this next agenda, I feel that society needs to feel it's loved, that they're enough, that they have what it needs to be loved deeply. And so there's a book coming out in January that I've worked with different individuals, but one of them is a man called Satish Kumar, who founded Schumacher's College. And he wrote a book called Radical Love. And there, his argument several years ago was already, can we and do we have the capacity to love a stranger on the street? And what does that look like, not only in society, but in our schools? And I would challenge those of us who are in education of, are we talking about love in school? Do we have an explicit place where we talk about loving relationships? And do we even have an HR department that is audacious enough to talk about that for staff? I was talking to someone from the IBO about some of the research that they were doing about staff well-being. And I said, yeah, I think it's fabulous that we're having this conversation, but what about the fabric of trust? It really is authentic if staff feel that they're received with a loving attitude, no? And I know that's hard to introduce. Some people said to me several years ago that we shouldn't talk about happiness in schools. That wasn't a topic to, and today they're saying to me we shouldn't talk about love in schools. But I do think there are some pioneers and there are some people who have definitely incorporated this into what they're doing, some of whom I'm working with in another group. So the world's full of possibilities. And if you look in your immediate circles, you probably have people who would align yourself with these thoughts. No? So that's a little bit about my personal journey right now. I hope you can tell that what I feel empowered to do is to really lead the life that I want to lead. No? And I didn't know that in my previous iteration or my other previous iteration, to go through the Russian doll business of peeling each layer off to discover there was another layer that was interesting enough that had the power to contribute to potentially conversations that are relevant, hopefully are relevant. And on the other hand, it could be me just being a total egoist, being consumed with my own story and thinking like, wow, isn't this interesting? And pushing it off on everybody else. So Karin, you can tell me whether there's anything of relevance here or not, or all of you can tell me, how does this resonate for you?
There's so much. I have many, many questions, and I'm sure other people in the room do as well. I want to go back to something you said right at the beginning, Mary Lyn, where you talked about this difference between being and doing. And on the one hand, you're kind of doing now all these things that fulfill you.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the being part? How do you need to be as a person in order to lead with love, in order to inspire others, in order to create these places, whether it's in schools or in businesses or organizations that are built through a fabric of connection and trust, like you talk about. So what do you need to do and be like in the world to get there? Because we can have these great ideas. I coach people that have wonderful missions.
Right.
But like, how do we lead those with? I mean, you've got your questions of curiosity, awe, and wonder, and the unconditional love.
Mm-hmm.
But relating it to you, like, I don't know if I'm making any sense, but
I mean, I think this is an answer that will be different for everyone in this space right now. No, for me, it was I had to go back and look at the patterns in my life that triggered certain reactions. And I did it with a coach. And I found that there were patterns of the experiences that I'd had in my life that when I re-encountered them in other situations would trigger certain emotions. And some of those emotions were not healthy. And so I had to do what I thought was deeper work to understand any interaction with anyone is not about healing myself. It's also about taking the healing that has to occur somewhere else. But in that interaction with someone is understanding what's their trauma, what is happening to them, and how can I take a more compassionate and empathetic approach to anything that they may be verbalizing or experiencing or bringing into our conversation. So previously, during the pandemic, we had a lot of very fear-led conversations in schools. And, people were heightened emotionally. And one had to try and put aside what one was feeling about what was happening and try to really concentrate and empathize and be compassionate about what the other person was experiencing at that time. And I find that continues to be true. a lot of people have come out of the pandemic exhausted. They still are carrying emotional wounds. And I know that when you go into the professional setting, you supposedly are not supposed to talk about all of that. But we bring whole people into our spaces and we can pick up on things that are happening to them. Yes, it may not be our training or our place to give them deep counseling in a conversation, but I found out in the pandemic that I needed to have allocated counselors, sometimes allocated therapists. I had to have a space where people could go and work through certain emotional aspects of their life without it being something that was discussed professionally. And so we gave staff at that time so many hours of therapy or counseling or coaching, whatever they wanted to do, so that they could explore certain issues that were coming up to the surface, hopefully so that they could come back into the school in a different mindset and were able to deal with internal dilemmas that they had. But I also realized that I hadn't had a toolkit to deal with aggression. I wasn't taught that as a head of school. I knew how to have difficult conversations, but I didn't know how to somatically work through the aggression that I experienced on occasion from people who were traumatized or who were leading conversations that were extremely aggressive. And so I went off to Bali for 6 weeks and I asked questions all around. I met incredible professionals who supported me in understanding, well, this could be a toolkit that you could use in a professional setting without doing anything terribly bizarre, but that would be very effective for you. And so they taught me about breath work. They taught me about visualizations and how to rid yourself of certain energetic onslaughts that you may have experienced. For me, I came out thinking, gosh, I wish we were teaching this in schools. We don't have that as part of our curriculum. And yet it's something that children and staff and parents are going to need moving forward.
Yeah, it's beautiful that you bring that up actually now, Mary Lyn, and that there is the deeper work that leaders need to do and professionals that we all need to do in order to find out how to lead our fulfilled lives. What are the questions we need to ask and how we can love ourselves unconditionally in order to love others unconditionally. And that is not only mindset, it is true body work as well. Because our behaviors and triggers are so automated, especially dealing with stressful situations like aggressive people, right? Or maybe even a toxic work environment. How do you handle that? How do you try and stay authentic to yourself when the environment is not there to kind of help you do that? I don't know if you have an answer for that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with Arthur Brooks. He works in Harvard. He's a happiness professor, and he's doing a pilot project now with the superintendents in the schools in Florida. And his answer to this question is how to deal with it is to train people to run happy schools. Not like the UNESCO defines happy schools, but as Arthur Brooks and his team of professionals are defining happy schools. And a lot of what they have to say is about love-based interventions, no? But they also remind us that leadership is not from the ego. Leadership is from beyond the ego. And one easy thing to do is when you look at a school and the senior leadership is all about me, 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 you know that that's not a school that is thinking about supportive practices. You know that it might be the start of a toxic environment where there isn't the capacity to listen to the other or to empathize with the other. And the sad thing is, and I'm sure Pauline can see this too, is that a lot of our rhetoric in our web pages or traditional environments is, we collaborate and we, lead as a distributed leadership team and we da-da-da-da. We've used the language, but we actually aren't living that in many instances. And so, right now I have the privilege of being able to call that out sometimes and say, guys, we're not actually doing what we said we would do. And to do what we would really need to do, we actually need to do a lot of work. I had a conversation with someone who was thinking of introducing new standards for leadership. And I said, the irony is that many of the leaders that we have are not the leaders that we need. No? And so we have to try and find ways to persuade leadership. It's obviously not only about leadership, but leaders do have an enormous impact in schools, and in different environments. So I started there answering your question, which is let's work from the inside out with leaders. One of the other things we're doing is trying to reimagine accreditation standards. We're trying to create toolkits for wellness in schools. So we're piloting some experiences there as well. I would like to think that it's authentically collective work and authentically co-constructed work. And it doesn't matter where it appears, the conversation. What matters is that we're doing it. And occasionally my own ego falls into play. Sometimes I say, no, I want to be a part of it. And then I say, back off, Mary Lyn. This is the world needs to do it at their own pace, in their own way, with their own voice. It shouldn't be about any one of us. It should be about what we collectively determine is the right pace and the right moment and the right inquiry to make for our own communities. So very different for each of us.
It's so beautiful how you actually lead beyond the ego, but in order to do that, we need to work on ourselves. And we actually need to figure out what excites us, what brings us wonder, what brings us awe. So there's this, sometimes people feel there's this tension or dichotomy, or like, if I lead a fulfilled life, that is selfish, right? And I believe that is truly the way to make an impact that you want to have, whether it's in schools or again, in businesses, organizations, this whole idea of creating environments, connecting with others while doing that. But as you say, from the kind of the inside out, doing our own work first. But I'm mindful of the time, so I would love to open up the conversation to any other two questions from who's joined us. We have so many experienced and other wise people in the call. Please raise your hand, unmute yourself, and ask away. I have more questions for Mary Lyn, but let's see what else is in the room.
Thanks, Mary Lyn. I have a question. Just listening to you is so inspiring. And, as professionals, even as we're doing this, there are things that you've talked about that we can really relate to and relate with, that journey. I was quite, when you talked about exploring transitions, and I thought that really hit home for me because I'm in the process of doing that. And then you talked about being the director of your destiny. So my question is, when you're doing the transition, okay, I know for different people it may be difficult, but if you could just talk to us briefly about how was your experience when you're doing that in terms of making a change, and being the director of your destiny means that you have to kind of change a lot of things or a few things. And also I think it means also that you have to do some work on yourself to be that. So if you could just talk to us a little bit about how did you do that, and probably I will steal a few insights from that and do that myself.
Yeah, well, Rosine, I think you probably have very rich answers to that question yourself. And the fact that you're, asking it is a sign of a good question coming to the forefront. I mean, I maybe need to backtrack a little bit. I do think that life is what you get, not what you want. And the art to life is appreciating what you get and working with what you get. So in transitions, you might be tempted to think this is what I want, but life will also give you what you're going to get. And there is, for the first time, a manual on developing transitional intelligence that was created by a group called the Modern Elder Academy. They're the first university that deals with people over 50 and how they're going to deal with different chapters in their life. But from those conversations, what I'm taking away is that transitional intelligence is about moving forward with various options, not only with one predetermined option, and then reconfiguring yourself to meet the option that the universe says will be the one that you can explore. So that may sound very complex and very uncertain, which it is, but then maybe the work is, how do we deal with fear? How do we deal with uncertainty? How do we deal with instability? And there's ways to do that spiritually, there's ways to do that emotionally, there's ways to do that cognitively. And there are different resources that you could go to build up your strengths in any one of those domains as you face fears. No? Which is a really good question to ask ourselves. What are we afraid of? What are we really genuinely afraid of? And are we ready to face it? No? And if we're ready to face it, we're ready to face any of the transitions that we encounter. No? I was a parachutist, I did scuba diving. I mean, I can't do that now, but I used to think it was about physical fear. And now I actually realize it's much deeper than that. It's the mental stories that we tell ourselves and the fears that we feel are insurmountable. And that at some point we need to take them out and air them and say, what if, no, I had nothing. I had no one. I was under that bridge alone at night. What if? Would life still be as purposeful and as rewarding? I would like to think it is, And actually, I know that all of you have worked in different challenging circumstances, but when I go out to certain situations where people are challenged in conventional fashions, I always think, wow, how can they be so happy with so little? And it reminds me to be a little bit more humble about my own way of dealing with transitions. But I hope, Rosalind, that tries to answer a little bit of what you asked. Yeah.
Yeah, it has. Thank you so much. And also with the resources that you've talked about, I think I'll also do that. And then there's one question, my takeaway from what you've just said is what is it that I'm afraid of? What do I fear? So that will also start me, into thinking of what is it, because I don't think I've nailed what it is. I think I know what it is, but I have to face it. So thank you for that. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Leslie.
Is there anyone else who has a question? Just please unmute yourself.
Mary Lyn, when I have seen you, I felt like a little bit of connection. I don't know why, but I met you 2 years back and I felt like, oh my God, my heart made connection. And today when I was listening to you, many things like peeling off your layers and to recover yourself. And at some age, probably that comes very much like people get reflective. And it's my own personal reflection I'm talking about over here. And when I try to see myself, a lot of confusion comes. What is right? What is wrong? Is it that this is the way I should think? Or something like that. And today, when you talk about love-based leadership, I have heard, we all know the different types of leadership, instructional leadership, educational, but how does it look like in practical situation? Like, what are the traits that describe that love-based leadership? Because this is the takeaway for me, because it's really such a wonderful phrase that you have used, love-based leadership. I have never given a thought of it, so how does it look like?
Well, and here I'll borrow a set of colleagues that are actually using this terminology and running their corporate spaces with this terminology and running their schools and creating love-based curriculum projects as well. No, for them, it's starting with, do I see the other person in my organization? And by seeing them, I mean, do I understand them not only for what they can contribute to what we're doing within a school, for example, but who they come into the space, as. And so we know that we have whole people walking into our organizations. They aren't just the curriculum leader or the learning support professional or the counselor, etc. They are a world unto themselves. And when they come into the school, do we recognize that whole person? For many of us, love-based leadership is Are we respectful of the humans that we have coming into our spaces? Are we creating environments and human ecosystems that respond to human needs? And I would even say sentient needs, any life needs inside of our communities. And are we sensitive to schedules? Some of our schedules are inhuman. Are we sensitive to the policies sometimes that we have within schools that allow enough time for staff to grieve if they've lost a loved one? And we're not all made in the same way. So can we make exceptions to these policies in ways that respond to real needs? No? So we've lived a very standardized approach to treating people as these human resources, these resources that have an input into a system that then has an output. But we're not in that kind of world anymore. We're in a much more complex, systemic world with younger employees coming into the workforce that want to have their emotional needs addressed, their life purpose respected, and having time to lead their other lives apart from their working lives. So when I talk about love-based leadership, it's finally being honest with each other and saying, we aren't only here to work together. Yes, of course, part of that is important, but we're here to coexist in a co-constructed fashion that is respectful. We have a podcast going, it's called Good Boss Stories, and we identify good bosses. And we were just interviewing somebody in the tech world. He was saying, I don't own that person that walks in that door. And if they have a bad day, I have to respect the fact that they have a bad day, and I have to work around it and try to bring the best out of them for our purposes. But I also have to understand that maybe we won't complete the task on hand. And I have to work around that as well. That's part of my responsibility as a good boss. And I just loved all of the things that he was saying and was thinking, wow. And the person who was his employee, who we also invited into the conversation, we asked, what's the biggest impact of his leadership style? And he said, well, I can actually think about other people outside of my work, and I can contribute to society in ways that support others' well-being. And I thought, wow, isn't this wonderful? That's the impact of a good boss. And that's the impact of a love-based environment, is that it's not just having an impact internally and with colleagues, it's actually transcending and having an impact further afield. But Hannah, I know that you do work in this area, whether you call it that or not. And so, you are a love-based leader. It's there. Maybe it's becoming more intentional in articulating it. And probably I don't have the good fortune of knowing everyone on the call, but I would suspect that everybody was attracted to this conversation because they already are strong in terms of wanting to connect to others, wanting to empathize with others and be compassionate with others. And so I would invite everyone to start to articulate it and to advocate for it. We can change the world one conversation at a time. But thank you for those questions, Hannah. And it's lovely to see you.
Thank you so much. As you said, maybe we needed to articulate it. I know that human leadership, but it's a really nice terminology to use, love-based leadership. Thank you so much. I'm taking back. But all the qualities that you have told or described, it's actually, we are practicing it and we are doing it, but maybe emphasizing it in an environment like a school culture and to talk about it more, maybe will shift our mindset from understanding it's not a place that we come only for work. It's a family. We all are working together and to understand each other better. But thank you so much. You described it so well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Also for that, I had that question too, so I'm so happy that you brought it up. We're almost at the hour. What I would like to end with today, there might be some questions. Feel free to send them to me. Many of you can connect with Mary Lyn if you'd like. Mary Lyn, if you'd like, open the chat. You could drop your LinkedIn profile on there if you want. But what I'd like for everyone on the call to think about, what is for you something that you're taking away from today's conversation? There were so many golden nuggets in there, but what's the one that's important for you? Whether it's Rosalind, what am I afraid of? Or for Hannah, how can I be more intentional about and explicit about love-based leadership. Please, if you think of your takeaway, I'd love it if you could drop it in the chat as well. So we can give Mary Lyn some feedback about what's resonated and kind of hit home with you. As a coach, I would say, besides your main takeaway, what are you going to do about it? Like, what is your small next step to live a more fulfilled life, to be able to show up more authentically, to work in environments that match your values, that you can be the person you want to be? You know, it's not a huge step, and maybe it's another conversation. Maybe it's to find a coach or a therapist. What is it? So both your insight, and if you're comfortable, sharing also a tiny, tiny little step that you're going to take to get there. So those of you who are adding, Pauline, thank you so much. How I will convince school boards to have love-based leadership. That's phenomenal. Understanding the who comes into your school or workplace, I would say. I keep making it broader because it's not only people from schools that are here, but it's like this all counts for organizations and businesses as well. A lot of the love-based leadership, Mary Lyn, is coming in.
Yeah.
Face your fears, take action. Thank you, Anchin. Mary Lyn?
No, maybe we can send out some resources on love-based leadership, because for some people they've heard about it, for some people they haven't. So I'd be happy, Barbara. I think that was the question you asked.
Yes.
Pauline, you know,
For sure.
To get board members to listen to this is to go to the World Economic Forum. I mean, if you can't get those people to listen to this, then we've got a problem.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to send out resources that Mary Lyn provides to us, to everyone on the call. Feel free to drop your LinkedIn here as well if you want to connect with other people. That's part of this as well, is to create some community and connections and have conversations with each other as well. I want to thank Mary Lyn for her time, her words of wisdom, sharing her stories with us. I'd like to thank all of you for being here today and joining. If you know anyone who's struggling with fulfillment, more joy, confidence, want more balance in their work and their lives, or might be going through a challenging transition, I'd love to connect with them. So please keep me in mind as well. I would like to end today with actually a poem that I heard yesterday in a training that I was in. I was like, oh, this is just perfect. And you actually mentioned this word, and I haven't told you the title of the poem, Mary Lyn. But listen to this. So this is a poem by Sheila Harkin. The poem is called Heart Warriors. And you said warriors at some point. So here's to the heart warriors who awkwardly, anxiously, timidly, but courageously do what they can to open that beating fistful of God every day and share its beauty. Here's to those who refuse to stop bringing forth the balm of their precious light to the thirsty lips of the world. Here's to those who believe our pride can be pulverized into tenderness if we keep opening to honesty, and to those who keep working to make diamonds from that coal. Here's to those who never stop believing this world can be so much more than it is, who know that is a rose inside of this bud, and to those who never stop using their lives to water it. I'll put this in the chat as well if you're interested in the poem. I thought it was a beautiful way to end today's conversation. I see some more takeaways from people. Let me see, I quickly want to acknowledge them. Kristen's main takeaway: taking action and responsibility for my own life is a pillar for happiness. It is empowering, and trusting yourself to do it. Exactly. That's beautiful. Thank you. You know, so inspiring. Mary Lyn, thank you. From Bridget. For Hannah's takeaway: it's not what I want in life, but what I get that matters. And exploring what I can get. Thank you. And there's the poem. All right, everybody. We let Mary Lyn share her wisdoms with you. I wish you all a beautiful evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you're calling from, because we're quite international today. And hopefully maybe for next month, I'm going to have another leader from a different sector that is also very, very interesting. She's based in South Africa and has an HR background. So maybe you'd like to join for that conversation as well. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.